All right, it's time to get back to these preview and prediction videos for all these teams for the 2024 college football season, going game by game and giving you a winner and a loser for every single week. We've done a bunch of teams already. There's a playlist called 2024 Predictions. I think we've done maybe 15 of them or whatever the number is. Feel free to click back and check out some of my thoughts on those other teams. But up today is the Florida Gators. And look, if I wanted to, I could make this a really quick video. I could just go, well, Florida's going to be terrible again. They've had 3 losing seasons in a row. Billy Napier's never had a losing season. Their schedule is brutal. They don't have nearly the talent or the depth to compete in the SEC, and they're staring down the barrel of what is likely to be a 4th straight losing season. Florida's terrible. Have a great day. I could easily just come on here and do that. And honestly, that would probably save a lot of time and accomplish the same thing, but we're going to attempt to do this video the same way we always do. All right, Florida Gators, Billy Napier heading into his 3rd year as head coach down there. He's 11-14 in his time at Florida, losing seasons in both years there. 5-7 last year, ended the season on a 5-game losing streak, and no, all 5 of those losses weren't to great teams. One of those losses was at home to Arkansas, another terrible team with a coach on the hot seat. So no signs of things improving, at least down the stretch. You know, sometimes you can start bad and get better as the season goes along, and maybe that provides optimism. Sometimes you have great recruiting, and maybe that provides optimism. And while Florida this time last year was hot on the recruiting trail for this past year's class, that class fell apart down the stretch. They did manage to hold on to the defensive lineman, L.J. McCray, and the quarterback, DJ Lagway, but the majority of that class fell apart. And when you look right now, the recruiting is just absolutely in the toilet. I think they're next to last in the SEC, just barely above Vandy, down in the 50s or 60s nationally in recruiting. Just not a lot of positive signs in Gainesville. Now, I'm just pointing out the obvious here. You call me a hater or, well, this guy, Georgia's his favorite team. Of course, he thinks Florida. Nobody thinks Florida's any good. It's just reality, okay? Vegas has their win total at about 5 for this year. They're likely to be about to have their 4th straight losing season. Billy Napier responsible for 2 of those. Fired Dan Mullen in 2021 after a losing season. Napier takes over in 2022, losing season. And then last year, 2023, losing season. Going 5-7, losing the last 5, like I mentioned. You got to go all the way back to the 1970s to find a Florida coach that started his tenure at Florida with back-to-back losing seasons, 1979 and 1980. You got to go all the way back to the 1940s to find a Florida coach that had 3 straight losing seasons. Something that appears likely to become a reality here for Billy Napier in 2024. But we're going to go through the schedule game by game. Let's look at the offense and the defense. What do they have coming back? What did they add? Is there a way? Look, it's possible some of the teams Florida plays end up being maybe not as good as we think they will be. And it's also possible Florida ends up being a little better and they find a way to get bowl eligible or have a winning record. We're going to go through the schedule game by game and kind of figure out what the chances of that are. But let's take a look at the offense and the defense. The offense, of course, starts with quarterback Graham Mertz. And if you're looking for a bright spot on Florida, whether it's last year or some optimism heading into this year, it would be quarterback Graham Mertz. I crapped all over Graham Mertz last offseason. I didn't like him at Wisconsin. Thought he was terrible. I thought he lacked playmaking ability, no explosive plays. And while he didn't set the world on fire at Florida, no one was mentioning him in terms of Heisman's or anything like that. I think he far exceeded everyone's expectations of what he was able to do at Florida in what was, let's just face it, a pretty bad team. Graham Mertz was kind of a bright spot. He led the SEC in terms of completion percentage. He completed 73% of his passes, 20 touchdowns. Again, that's not a Heisman number, but 20 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. So he takes care of the ball. He doesn't make mistakes. He puts the ball where it needs to be, and he completes a very high percentage of his passes. Now, the wide receiver that was the beneficiary of a lot of those passes, unfortunately for Florida, is gone off to the NFL, and I'm, of course, talking about Ricky Pearsall. They're going to replace him with Eugene Wilson. And this is where you kind of start to shake your head a little bit at Florida fans. When Graham Mertz came in, they gave him the number 15. No one's had the number 15 since Tim Tebow. Now, look, I'll be the first to admit that Graham Mertz was better last year than I thought he would be. He's not in the same stratosphere as a player like Tim Tebow. But some of these Florida fans, they want to hype it up that way. And then you got this wide receiver, Eugene Wilson, which, look, he's good. He's quick. He's fast. He can run. He can catch. He can run after the catch. He's a really good player. But they're comparing him to Percy Harvin. But Percy Harvin is probably one of the best 5 football players to ever come out of the University of Florida. I remember a quote from Pete Carroll, of all people. He used to be the coach at Southern Cal, spent a lot of time in the NFL, of course, with the Seahawks. And he ended up with Percy Harvin in the NFL. And he was asked one time, a few years back, who the best football player he ever coached was. Without hesitation, he said Percy Harvin. And Pete Carroll has coached some pretty good football players. You go back to his time at Southern Cal with Reggie Bush and that, and Matt Leinart, and even on into the NFL. I'm just telling you, I like Eugene Wilson. I think he can have a good year. I think Mertz and in that Napier system will find a way to get him the ball, whether you're talking about downfield for explosive over-the-top plays, hitch passes just to get him the ball in space, jet sweeps or reverses, whatever. They're going to find ways to get him the ball, and I think he'll have a good year. Comparing a player that your average college football fan can't name, and look, that's what Eugene Wilson is. I know all the Florida fans know who he is. And again, I'm telling you right now, I think he's good. I'd take him on my team. He's not Percy Harvin. He's just not. Running back is another area where Florida lost some in the portal. Of course, their running back last year, ETN, transferring to rival Georgia. Now, all of a sudden, the Florida fans are trying to tell you he was the second best running back on their team when they've spent the last 2 years telling everybody he was the best running back on the planet. Now, Montrell Johnson is still there, and he's good too. The issue, I've talked about this when it comes to Clemson. Okay, Clemson had Will Shipley last year, and then they had Maffa. And Maffa was a great alternative and change of pace to what Will Shipley did. And so when you look at their overall numbers, you go, oh, well, Maffa had more yards per carry, and he had this and he had that. It's harder to do that when you're the main guy. The same can be said for Montrell Johnson. I think he's really, really good. How good will he be without ETN? That remains to be seen. He's not the home run threat that ETN is. He's a bruiser. He's a pounder. Again, a guy that I would take on my team. I like Montrell Johnson. Not here to tell you he's not any good, just like I told the Clemson fans, not telling you Maffa's not any good. But there's a reason why most programs now have a 1-2 punch at quarter or at running back. In a lot of cases, even a third running back. Every running back on your team becomes better when you have other running backs you can put in to give them breaks, change of paces, things like that. So again, I'm not here to tell you Montrell Johnson's not good, but it's in no way a positive that Florida lost ETN. No, in no way is that a positive. That's a net negative to Florida's running back room, losing ETN. So we'll see how that goes this year. Offensive line, this is the one area on Florida. If you were going to pinpoint one area on Florida's offense that has got to get a whole lot better in 2024 than what we saw in 2023, it would be the offensive line. The offensive line wasn't great in 2022, but in 2023, it was horrendous. They allowed 22 more sacks last year than they did the year before. Now, some of that is because you had Graham Mertz this last year, who's not nearly as mobile, whereas before you had Anthony Richardson. So some of that maybe can be accounted for, but 22 more sacks in the previous year is not good. They also ran the ball for about 1.7 yards less per carry in 2023 than they did in 2022. And again, that was with both ETN and Montrell Johnson toting the rock. The offensive line has got to get a whole lot better. They brought in some transfers to help out there. Their left tackle, Austin Barber, he's got to stay healthy, something he's had a hard time doing so far. But that's the one area on Florida's offense that has got to get a whole lot better in a hurry if they're going to find a way to make a bowl game this season. Over on the defensive side of the ball, not good last year at all. During that 5-game losing streak to end the season, they gave up 39 points per game. Never mind the fact that their offense wasn't lighting the world on fire. I don't care how good your offense is. If you're giving up 39 points per game, you're not going to win much of anything. I mean, Lincoln Riley has one of the best offenses on the planet every single year. And why can't they win anything? No defense. 39 points per game. Boy, that's bad and hard to do. Led to a lot of coaches being fired on the defensive side of the ball. They flipped a lot of the coaches around over there, brought in some new faces, new defensive line coach, new secondary coach. When you look at the defensive line for Florida in 2023, a couple of bright spots, Collins and is the guy's name Cersei? I'm drawing a blank on the second guy's name. But anyway, they're both sophomores this year. They played a lot last year. you see players a lot of times make a big jump from year one to year two. I'm talking playing time year one to year two. The jump could happen from your sophomore to your junior, or your junior to your senior season if your first year playing was your sophomore or your junior. But they played last year. They're sophomores this year. We'll see how much better they look at safety. They've got Jordan Cantrell. He comes back. I think he led the team in tackles last year. He had like 60 tackles last year. He's back, so I think that's a bright spot. And then the secondary overall, I feel like could be a strength for Florida, but they're going to have to stay healthy. Again, something that they've had a hard time doing in the secondary. Devin Moore, injured last year. He's back, expected to start at one of the corner spots. And, of course, across from that, you got four-year starter Jason Marshall. No real questions about him. Again, he's not going to win the award for the best corner or whatever, but a ton of playing time within the SEC. Four-year starter there, Jason Marshall. Looking pretty good in the secondary, I think, for Florida. They also brought in some transfers and things like that to help in the secondary. I think if you want to try to find a strength of Florida's defense, probably the secondary. Is it going to be one of the best 5 or 10 secondaries in the country? Probably not, but they're experienced, and if they can stay healthy, I think it'll be a bright spot for Florida. Defensively. Defensive end Justice Boone is back from knee surgery, as is linebacker Shamar James. Is that his name? Anyway, 2 players back from knee injury. Now, look, you hear a lot of this from Florida fans when you talk to them about last year's deal. Well, this guy was out, and that guy was out, and this guy was out, and this guy got hurt. Now we brought in this guy. If all of that works out, I think Florida can have a good defense. If these 2 guys coming back from knee injury can play like they played pre-knee injury, great. If the people that have struggled to stay healthy can stay healthy, great. If these freshmen that played last year can make a significant jump in year 2, great. Florida can have a good defense. You're counting on a lot of things happening that are nowhere close to a guarantee of actually happening in order for Florida to field a good defense. It takes a leap of faith. That freshman LJ McCray, he's probably going to have to play. Whether he starts or not, we'll see. But Florida doesn't, some of these schools, they sign these 5-star kids and then they don't play their first year, and then people are going, this guy must not be any good. He's not playing. He was a 5-star and he's not playing. A lot of these schools sign a 5-star and they're behind 2 other 5-stars. On the depth chart is why you might not see him in the first year. That's just not the case at Florida. Not a whole lot of 5-stars floating around campus down there in Gainesville. It's going to be hard to keep LJ McCray off the field. True freshman interior defensive lineman. We'll see how quick he can adjust to sort of the physicality and the speed of big-time college football coming in his first year out of high school. But he's got a ton of talent there. No question about it. All right, it's time to put Florida's schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game. I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week, and we'll see if Florida can avoid a 4th straight losing season. All right, one of the biggest games early in the season, one of the most talked about games this offseason, the Florida versus Miami game. These are 2 in-state rivals, I guess, although they don't play very often. At least not anymore. In my mind, for something really to be a rivalry, it needs to kind of be a yearly thing to me. Look, everybody's got their own definition of what a rivalry is. No matter what you want to call the Florida and Miami game, it's a bitter game. You got kids on these teams that knew each other from high school, and in some cases longer than that. It's always a sort of chippy type of game when Miami and Florida get together, and I would expect that to be the case again this season. A lot of expectations for Miami. And in terms of pressure to win this game, I think all the pressure is on Miami. They've been picked to win the ACC and be a potential playoff contending team this year. Florida has become basically an afterthought in any conversation about winning conferences or making playoffs. It's just a team that just doesn't even get discussed when that topic is brought up. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Miami to win this game. I think this will be a close game. I think a lot of people will come away from this game surprised at how close it is. But I do think Miami gets the win here. I just think they're more talented. I like their coaching staff a lot more than I like Florida's coaching staff. And I think Florida and Sunbelt Billy start the season 0-1 with a tough, close loss to Miami. Didn't they get a little bit of a break in a schedule that really doesn't provide any at all? They host Samford. They should get this win. Samford has put a scare into a couple of SEC teams over the last few years, but Florida will get this win at home. They're 1-1. And then in comes Texas A&M. Texas A&M, a talented team, new coaching staff, very underwhelming and disappointing the last several years under Jimbo Fisher, but Mike Elko's there to turn it around. He was at Duke last year. Prior to that, he spent time at Texas A&M as a defensive coordinator. I really, really like the Mike Elko hire at Texas A&M. I don't necessarily think that's going to translate to a bunch of wins for Texas A&M in year one there. And if you look at what Florida has done positively in the last 2 years under Billy Napier, there's not a lot. It's hard to find. But one of the things they have managed to do in each of the last 2 seasons is win a game in September that nobody thought they were going to win. If you go back to 2 years ago, they hosted a top 15 Utah team and beat them at home. You go back to last season, Tennessee comes in. After the season they had the year before, Tennessee was off to another hot start last year. They show up in Gainesville, and Florida beats them. I think this Texas A&M game this season is that game for Florida. I think they find a way to beat Texas A&M. And if they're going to get bowl eligible, they've got to win one of these 2 games against Miami and Texas A&M. They cannot drop them both. I don't think they do. I think they beat Texas A&M. They're 2-1. Then they have their first road trip of the season against SEC opponent Mississippi State. Not a lot of teams in the SEC picked to do worse than Florida, but Mississippi State is one of them. Another team with a brand new coaching staff and not a whole lot of talent. I think Florida goes on the road and gets a win at Mississippi State. They're 3-1. Oh my God, everybody was wrong. Billy Napier does know what he's doing. To come out of that, you have a bye week. Remember, we have 2 bye weeks this year because there's an extra Saturday between the start of the college football season and conference championship Saturday. So everybody gets 2 bye weeks. This is the first one for Florida. They head into their first bye week 3-1. Disappointing loss to Miami, but I think Florida fans, given the way they've done the last couple of years and the way people have talked about Florida heading into 2024, I'm willing to bet most Florida fans would take 3-1 heading into that first bye week. That's where the good news ends, unfortunately, for Florida. Coming out of this bye week, there are no breaks on this schedule other than the second bye week, which we'll get to in a second. This might be the toughest 8 games in a row I've ever seen anybody play. The last 5 games is getting all of the attention, and I get it. You look at those last 5 games, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. All of those teams are ranked in every single top 15 poll you can find right now, and the majority of those teams are going to be ranked in the top 10 when those games are played at the end of this season. But you can go even further than this. Coming out of this bye week, Central Florida, another in-state opponent, new to the Power 5. Central Florida, this game means way more to Central Florida than it does to Florida. It would mean everything to Central Florida to knock off Florida. It doesn't matter that Florida's bad or, might not do well in the SEC or their record, whatever it happens to be. It doesn't matter. To Central Florida, it's still Central Florida beating Florida. Gus Malzahn is the coach there. He's no stranger to coaching in big games. He's got KJ Jefferson at quarterback now that he brought in from Arkansas, who, look, again, not a guy that's going to be winning any Heisman trophies. And no, he is not Cam Newton. So those that are saying that, Gus Malzahn, coached Cam Newton back in 2010. One of the greatest seasons we've ever seen from a quarterback in the history of college football. KJ Jefferson is the same type of player as Cam Newton. He's a similar build to Cam Newton. He's nowhere near as talented. So no one should suggest that he is. But I think he's going to be able to run that Gus Malzahn offense. This is a very dangerous game for Florida here for perception purposes. And I don't think it goes Florida's way. I think they lose this game. And that means 5 games into the season, they've lost 2 games to in-state opponents, Miami and now Central Florida. I think Miami's sitting at 3-2. They come out of that, they got to go on the road at Tennessee. I know they beat them last year. I know they've beat them something like 17 of the last 19 years, whatever it is. Florida has beaten Tennessee. They're not beating this year's Tennessee team in Knoxville. Now, if this game was in Gainesville, given the way things have gone for Tennessee away from Knoxville, maybe you look at Florida to pull an upset at home. Not on the road. I just don't see it. I don't think Nico's winning 19 Heismans, never losing a game, and winning 7 national championships like Tennessee fans do. But I do think he's going to be able to run that Josh Heupel offense more efficiently and better than Joe Milton did last year. Tennessee's defense is also very underrated, doesn't get talked about enough. They've got one of the best fronts in the SEC, if not the entire nation. I think Florida's going to have a hard time moving the ball, and I think they're going to have a hard time stopping Tennessee from moving the ball. This game could be a blowout. I think Tennessee wins big at home. That's Florida's third loss. They're 3-3. After that Tennessee game, another absolute must-win at home against Kentucky. Now, it used to be you didn't even have to spend 5 seconds thinking about this Florida-Kentucky game. It wasn't that long ago Florida was sitting on a 31-32 game winning streak, whatever it was, against Florida. And this is a game that's played every year. So this isn't like they won 30 games over a 100-year period. I mean, they beat Kentucky 33 times in a row, 33 years in a row, or whatever it was, 30, 31, whatever it was. Since then, Kentucky, I believe, has won 3 of the last 5, maybe even 4 of the last 6. And it's kind of flipped this series on its head, at least over the last 4 or 5 years. But this game is at home for Florida. It comes before a bye week. It's right before that brutal 5-game stretch that everybody's been talking about for months now. I think Florida finds a way to get this win. This is probably the game I'm least confident in. When it comes to picking, just Kentucky has had their number, but there's an unknown at quarterback for Kentucky and Brock Vandergriff, a kid that transferred from Georgia. I like Brock Vandergriff's potential. I like his skill set. I like his size. I like his abilities. But the reality is, just never saw him play. He was buried on the depth chart at Georgia, and he's a big, physical, athletic guy, cannon for an arm, can run around. Kentucky does this, QB for hire situation every year. They brought in Devin, what's his name, last year. Before that, it was the guy from Penn State. I mean, it's just every year they're bringing in another quarterback in the portal. They're trying it again, this time with Brock Vandergriff. Kentucky is telling us that they've got the best receiving core they've ever had. Again, it seems like we hear that from Kentucky every year. Then the season ends and you can't name one of their receivers. I think Florida finds a way at home to get a win here against Kentucky, and in a must-win situation here. And then comes that bye week, and then you come out of that. Now, before we get into my prediction for these last 5 games, let me say something about Billy Napier, what I think may happen to him. A lot of speculation. Is he going to get fired? Will he get fired? If he does get fired, when will it be? According to the predictions that I've got so far here, Florida will be sitting 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3. Heading into their second bye week. There's a 0% chance in my mind that if that's accurate and Florida is 4-3 heading into that second bye week, there's no chance he gets fired before the season ends. Even if they come out of that bye week and get blown out by Georgia, they're going to be 4-4. I mean, at that point, you're not firing Napier. They would have to lose this Texas A&M and or the Kentucky game, which I have them winning. I don't think they're losing to Mississippi State, and I don't think they're losing to Samford, right? So those are 2 wins that are as close to guaranteed wins as you're going to get on this schedule. They could lose to Texas A&M. They could lose to Kentucky. I've got them winning, which puts them at 4-3. If they lose one of those games, they're 3-4. If they lose them both, they're 2-5. If they're 2-5, heading into this bye week, before the Georgia game, before that last 5-game stretch, if they're 2-5 and they lose to Kentucky, I could see Florida firing Billy Napier the Sunday after the Kentucky game. Now, this would be early in the season, I get, but we're seeing coaches fired earlier in the season all the time now because of the timetable with recruiting has been moved up to December and some transfer portal window stuff. So it wouldn't be the strangest thing we've ever seen. But whatever they decide to do in the meantime, which usually they promote a coordinator or a current coach on the staff to interim head coach. So again, this is assuming that they're 2-5. I don't have them going 2-5 in the first 7. I've got them at 4-3, in which case I don't think Napier's getting fired. But if I'm wrong and they're 2-5, because people always ask me about this, if they're 2-5 heading into that bye week, I think they fire Napier the Sunday after the Kentucky game. I think they promote somebody from within to interim head coach. It gives that person and the new staff 2 weeks to try to keep the team together heading into this last 5 games because you have a bye week. it just seems like a convenient time to just go ahead and usher Napier out the door, especially if the recruiting class stays in the toilet like it is now. There would be no real reason to keep him. A lot of times you worry, if I fire my coach in October or November, what's going to happen to my recruiting class? Well, Florida doesn't appear to have much of a recruiting class. If they're 2-5, I would not be surprised if they fired Billy Napier the Sunday after this Kentucky game, giving the new coach 2 weeks to sort of bring the team back together for that Georgia game and then heading down this last 5-game stretch. But again, that's all hypotheticals based on what their record might be heading into this second bye week. All right, let's get back to the predictions. Come out of the bye week, they play Georgia, neutral site every year in Jacksonville. Well, I say every year. They're going to renovate that stadium and they're going to have to play. What are they doing? Are they doing Orlando and Atlanta anyway? They're not going to do home and home, which is what they should. Anyway, they're not beating Georgia. Georgia will beat them. Georgia has owned Florida. Georgia's beat them something like 8 of the last 9 years or something like that. That trend will continue. Florida just doesn't have, whether Napier is there or not, whether they're 5-3 or 2-5, none of that matters. They're not winning that Georgia game. The same can be said the following week on the road at Texas. Having to play Georgia and Texas in back-to-back weeks is just brutal. And neither one of these games is at home. I mean, the Georgia game's not a road game. It's a neutral site deal in Jacksonville, but they got to travel to Jacksonville to play Georgia, travel to Austin, Texas to play Texas. I mean, the combined score of these two games, it could be like 100-20. This is not going to be a pretty 2-game stretch for Florida. No matter what happened in the 7 or 8 games before that, they're losing both of those. Then LSU comes to town. I'm not on the LSU train. I don't understand the LSU hype. They were terrible last year defensively. They appear, at least to me, to have done almost nothing to address that, at least player-wise. They brought in some new coaches. Nussmeier at quarterback, he's looked good when he's played in a backup role behind Jaden Daniels. But I don't care how good he is, he's not going to give them what Jaden Daniels gave them last year. We're talking about 5,000 yards, 40-something touchdowns, a Heisman trophy. He's not getting anywhere near those numbers. I don't understand the hype around LSU this year. I don't. I think the Vegas win total on them is 9.5. Hammer the under there. I think Florida beats LSU. This is another Florida rivalry series that has gotten out of hand in recent years. LSU has won something like 7 of the last 10 against Florida, and they play every year. It's a home game for Florida. They're going to be happy to be back home after 2 bad losses in a row away from home with Georgia and Texas. I'm giving a lot of benefit of the doubt here. And again, if I am wrong about my first half of the season, I've got Florida at 5-3, first 8, or whatever, 4-3, the first 7. If I'm wrong about that, and they're 2-5 instead, and Billy Napier has been fired after the Kentucky game, then no, they're not beating LSU. They'll ship it in and lose it the rest of these. But I'm giving Florida the benefit of the doubt here. I'm giving them a win against LSU late in the year. Here's the thing: I find it hard to believe Florida's going to lose all 5 of those in a row, and then I look back and realize, well, they lost their last 5 games last year against teams not as good as this. So I don't know, but I'm giving Florida the benefit of the doubt here. I think they get a win at home against LSU. Not the case the following week against Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin, who I think should be Florida's next coach. I don't want him to. As a Georgia fan, I don't want Lane Kiffin anywhere near Florida. I think Lane Kiffin would be an absolute home run at Florida, but that's a different video for a different day. I think Ole Miss comes into Gainesville, puts on a show, whips Florida. And then, unfortunately, the next week on the road at Florida State, again, I don't think Florida State will be as good as they were last year. I still think they're going to be really good, a top 15 team, contending to win the ACC and make the playoffs, and they're way better than Florida. I think Florida totes an L on the road in Tallahassee. That puts Florida at 5-7. Now, I've been taking calls and reading comments from y'all since January that Florida's going 2-10, 3-9. I've got them at 5-7. The Florida fans can get mad at me if they want to. They can stomp the ground. They can punch the air, whatever they need to do. I think 5-7 is a pretty fair look at what Florida could potentially be in 2024. Again, try to find more than 5 wins. And keep in mind, I'm giving Florida the clear benefit of the doubt on 2 games, Texas A&M and LSU. Kentucky, I think I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt there too. That's 3 wins right there that could go the other way. I'm erring on Florida's side there. As far as games that I've got Florida losing that they could potentially win, Miami, Central Florida, Those would be the two that stand out. I don't think they're beating Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, or Florida State no matter what. Tennessee, I don't see it either. So maybe, I guess, I could be wrong about the Miami loss and the Central Florida loss. And if I'm wrong about those two, but right about everything else, they'd be 7-5. So I guess that's what I would call the ceiling for Florida, in my opinion, 7-5. I think the floor really is about 2-10, maybe 3-9. I've got them at 5-7. Appreciate you watching. Make sure you check out the other prediction videos. Again, I've done a whole bunch of these, a whole series of them. We're going to keep them going right up until the start of the college football season. So subscribe if you're new. If you're not, I post this pointless, barely watchable college football content year-round. Do a call-in show every Tuesday and Thursday night. Today's Tuesday. Tune in tonight, 9 p.m. We'll talk some college football. But I do appreciate you watching. Let me know, am I right or wrong? What's your record prediction for Florida? And most importantly, don't forget to let me know down below how stupid I am. Have a good morning.